Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel, or welcome for the first time if you're new here. I am James, and this is the beginning of what will be my Stormlight Archive review and discussion series. If you're new here, I have just started reading the Cosmere. I'm a big Wheel of Time fan, as you can probably tell by the username. That's usually the series that I have read, but I decided to get into some Cosmere. So far, I read the Mistborn series, and I enjoyed it enough to pick up the first 3 books in the Stormlight Archive. So I have recently been reading The Way of Kings, and right now I'm halfway through it. The copy that I got is actually 2 books. Yeah, there we go, when it focuses. Yeah, too close to the mic maybe. Yeah, so I've actually got 2 copies of The Way of Kings. But it's part 1 and part 2, which might be able to see if I can right at the bottom there. So far, I have only read part 1, and I thought it'd be good to take a moment to record some thoughts before reading part 2, because I found during Mistborn a lot of the time, I had a lot of thoughts in the middle of books, but by the end of the books, those plot lines were already resolved, those predictions has already been confirmed or denied, so I ended up just recapping a lot of the book's events without actually talking about my my theories on the way through. So I thought I would stop halfway through the Stormlight books, considering all of my copies are split in halves. I've got the first 3, The Way of Kings, and then Words of Radiance and Oathbreaker over there, also split in half, so I figured I could do the same thing with them. And it's worth mentioning, because I know a lot of people will only have the original copies that were a single book. There's an afterword at the end by Brandon Sanderson here, where he talks about how he was aware that The Way of the Kings was going to be really long, and he'd need to offer the publishers the choice to split it in halves. So the breakpoint was chosen for its fulfillment of several plot cycles while beginning the whispers of the true challenges ahead. So it's not meant to be taken as 1, but 2 divided parts, but Brandon thought this was the best place to split the book into 2, and that's right at the end of chapter 36. So for this first part of the review, I'm only going to be talking about stuff confirmed in the first 36 chapters of the book. So if you do have a full copy and you want to know where the spoiler level is at, for now, it's going to be up to chapter 36 of The Way of Kings, which is just a little bit into part 3. And then the second part of this video, I'll try and remember to do a timestamp, will be for the rest of the first book. But without further ado, let's get started on The Way of Kings part 1. I have a list of characters that I want to go through, but first let's just set the tone of the story so far. I've been enjoying my time on Roshar. There is so much exotic, vibrant wildlife. The fact that plants adapt to the storms by like shrinking away or bending their branches to go with the wind or whatever. I find that really fascinating. Obviously, it's very fantasy, but it is fantastical in a way that a lot of fantasy doesn't actually do. You'll find a lot of high fantasy, especially these days, like Game of Thrones, even Wheel of Time, it still has natural basis in the human world. Like Wheel of Time is based on Earth in the future. It has magic, yeah, but the nature is still somewhat akin to our own, as is the case, I believe, in the Lord of the Rings without actually having read it. I've only watched Lord of the Rings, but Game of Thrones definitely, again, very based and steeped in our Earth as we know it. Roshar, in the world of the Stormlight Archive, is vast and different, and there are corners of civilization. I believe the Shin land sounds a bit more like our Earth from what I've gleaned so far, but the majority of Roshar is just adapting to the high storms that constantly plague the planet, and that the series is obviously based off Stormlight. And then the general magic system hasn't been too thoroughly explored yet, so I don't have that much of a deep understanding of it, but it seems to have, again, a very equal effect on the world's economy and structure and societies. There's obviously some history and divine aspects going on here, or at least what people in the current modern day of Stormlight see as divinity, whether or not they actually are. But overall, the nature of the high storms and the stormlight that they infuse into certain types of gems and crystals, which can then be used for a whole host of different powers and abilities. I know there's soul casting and there's something to do with gravity called lashing, but neither of them have been vastly explored yet. I imagine we'll get some more soul casting in the second part of this, but I suppose I can address that as part of the Shallan discussion. The magic itself, though, does have a vast effect on the world around it. All the buildings are soul cast stone, meaning they're just stone structures created out of thin air by turning air into stone, which is really cool. And it's a basis for society, because the society can function on fabricated stone and wood, or metals, not gemstones, but metals, food even, grain, you can make out of big rocks. So it changes the whole sort of economy of the world. That combined with the fact that gems are the things that power all these, it makes them most valuable resources, which makes sense, although diamonds have a really weak effect or something, so they're actually the least valuable form of currency in Roshar, from what I can glean, which is quite funny, because obviously they're incredibly expensive in our world. It's a parallel, obviously, but that's nice. It's a nice detail. But all of these gems and devices and magical things are powered by the Stormlight itself, and the gems need to be infused by being left out in a high storm, which people should not be left out in unless they want to die, or unless their name is Kaladin. We'll get into that in a little while. Overall, the world building so far has been really good. It's so vivid, and it takes you into a different place that feels like it could be a world in Spore, or what's the other game I'm thinking of? The one with the 9 trillion planets. It did so well that I've forgotten the name. As far as the pacing's concerned, it jumps around a lot, maybe a little too much, because at first I had struggle getting it into the chapters, as we were just changing characters like all the time. I couldn't like just sit down and focus on it for an extended period. But later into the book, the breaking up of the characters' perspectives, mostly one chapter at a time. Sometimes a character gets 2 chapters in a row, but it's rare. The way that was broken up did keep it high investment. It kept me wanting to turn to the next page in the next chapter, because there was still an unresolved plot line from whoever the previous chapter was about. The entire time I'm reading the current chapter, and by the time I finish the current chapter, there's an unresolved plot line there for me to pick up after the next chapter finishes. So it works in a way. However, at first it did put me off a bit, because I just couldn't sit and get engrossed in one character for a bit and experience the world through their eyes, and then start splitting up. I think that would have been slightly better for me, but overall, not too much of a problem. The pacing throughout was good. Stuff was happening, you know. There was plenty going on. Even in times where not a lot changed about people's position or status in life, there was still enough going on through what we were learning about the world and how it works to keep those moments where there's only character development but not plot development. It can be a little stale sometimes, but in this, with the world building alongside that and the magic to explore and the folklore and cultures, it makes those character moments enough to stand on their own without needing significant plot events. There have been some in this first half, and it's only the first half of the book. There's been some significant plot events too, but what I'm trying to say is that the slower moments are just as well paced, because they're giving you more information on Roshar and how its interlocking systems all work and combine together. So far on the whole, after going through part 1 before I get into my thoughts on individual characters, really been enjoying The Way of Kings. Been really happy to see how it's gone so far, because I didn't know how much I was going to enjoy Stormlight Archive. I thought Mistborn was good, but it sort of tempered my expectations for Stormlight a little more. But Stormlight is living up to its expectations so far and exceeding them. I've been really enjoying it, and to be honest, I'm probably speaking really fast because there's a little bit of me that just wants to get onto this second part of the book. But with it being split in half, I can't not talk about it in halves. So let's burn through these characters, and I'm going to spend more time on the important ones anyway, because, well, there's not too much to say about the side characters yet. I don't know that much about them. The main character so far that's been consistent, because the way that Brandon likes to separate his parts up, they tend to focus on 2 or 3 characters in a part. You get point of views from them, and then there's like 5 parts or something in total over the course of the book. In this, there was 2 and a bit of the 3rd, so I'm guessing there's 5 in total. But each one of those parts only gives you viewpoints from like 2 or 3 different characters. But Kaladin was present in all 3 of the parts so far, and I'm guessing he will be in the 4th and 5th if there is a 5th as well, unless something happens to him. But so far nothing has that's actually bad. Well, a lot's happened to him that's bad, but nothing's happened that stopped him from being a continuing plot in the story, is what I mean to say. So Kaladin's been consistent throughout The Way of Kings so far, and I've heard the name a lot before actually starting with Stormlight or Cosmere at all. I'd heard the name Kaladin a bunch, and I know that people like him a lot. I know that he's a real sad boy, and that's about all I knew about him. And yeah, he's a real sad boy. The first time we see him, he's saving a young guy, I've forgotten his name, Sen Bui. He's saving Sen Bui's life, but child Sen Bui. If you're not a Wheel of Time fan, never mind. The kid Sen. And he's been all epic in battle, and people are like, woo, it's Kaladin Stormblessed. And then some shit goes wrong, and the kid's like passing out, and we're in his point of view, so we don't get a clear end to the fight. But it appears that there was a shard bearer charging in on them, and this seems like a good time to explain my understanding of shard bearers. So there's 2 types of shards: shard blades, shard plate. Shard plate, when you're wearing it, gives you infused like superhuman powers. Basically, you get super strength, you can jump higher because of that strength, you have agility and endurance. It doesn't give you extra powers, but it enhances your own, which means that you can be like really fatigued afterwards, which makes sense. It works in a very similar way to the external powers in Mistborn, like pewter, now that I'm thinking about it. So in a way that seems, maybe it's made of pewter. Maybe shard plate is pewter. That'd be an interesting connection. I hadn't actually thought of any connections really yet between Mistborn and Stormlight, but here we go. Cosmere 101, guys. Shard plate's pewter. Okay. So yeah, shard plate and shard blade. The shard plate gives you these enhanced powers, and the shard blade can kill people's souls themselves and make their eyes burn out with smoke, and then yeah, it's pretty gruesome, and it cuts for everything else like it's cloth. So both of these tools are very important. However, they seem to be bound to a single person. The shard blade can also be summoned. It takes exactly 10 heartbeats, which means that if you drink lots of coffee, like me, shout out the Dusty Wheel / Steve's show, you'd be able to summon your heartbeat in no time. Sorted. Just drink lots of coffee. I found the entity problems, Roshar. I'm on fire today. I'm really not though, so I'm probably going to cut this bit. But I'm on fire today. So, back to Kaladin. There was a shard bearer charging down on their army as we cut out of the kid Sen's perspective. So we didn't get to see what happened at the end of that fight. But the next time we see Kaladin, he's a slave. And he's being transported, eventually we find, to the Shattered Plains, where he wanted to go all along when he was fighting in the army. He wanted to go there as a warrior, obviously, because it's meant to be prestiged for fighting against the Parshendi. But he ended up there as a slave and turned into a bridgeman. And we begin Bridge 4, the harrowing journey of Kaladin Stormblessed. So we fuck, how do you talk about bridgemen? Like, it's just brutal, isn't it? Obviously, they're not meant to live. They're meant to die. That's what their job is, to take fire away from the actual army people that matter. So it's pretty brutal, and these bridgemen get run ragged. They have to carry the bridges, right? And I'm not actually explaining any of this. So the Shattered Plains is this huge battleground, and it turns out that, well, for Kaladin's arc, the only important bit is that it's a big battleground, one side against the other, and that there's these huge chasms, because it's a Shattered Plains, literally. There's these huge chasms that separate different plateaus on the rock, and to get between them, the armies need bridges. So they have these teams of bridgemen, slaves, who have no choice other than to just run with the bridge on their backs. If they refuse to run, they get executed. If they do run, they'll probably die anyway, because when they get to the last plateau, there's a bunch of the enemy army already waiting for them there, the vast majority of the time, and they start raining fire down on the bridgemen. And the whole purpose of this in the army's perspective is that if they didn't do that, then those same archers would be firing on their actual troops, their soldiers. So they sacrifice the lives of bridgemen instead, because it's cheaper to just burn slaves' lives away. So Kaladin gets stuck in a bridge team, and Bridge 4 is the one that he is stuck in. The renowned, terrible bridge that everyone hates. And there's a jerk called Gaz above him, and Kaladin pretty soon starts to get sick of this shit, and blackmails / bribes Gaz into letting him be the bridge leader. And at first no one respects him, but he eventually demands their respect by saving their lives over and over again, repeatedly. And he doesn't just save people's lives initially and make sure that they get brought back, which is something they're not meant to do. He goes out with the small recruits that he has managed to gather and collects herbs and plants, knobweed, to create disinfectant on the wounded's wounds, so that they can actually live, not just survive the initial charge into a hailstorm of arrows. So yeah, he keeps them going, and not only that, he gives them a sense of camaraderie. And Kaladin's sort of journey here with Rock and Teft is really adorable, I can't lie. That moment where they're all on the cliff having a heart-to-heart, talking about the pasts, and just milking knobweed. Oh god, I can't say that, can I? I can't say that. Brandon, why have you done this? Milking knobweed. Don't clip that. Ugh. Yeah, it was a cute moment until I thought about it, and now I'm like... But that whole journey really was about Kaladin just trying to gather the respect of these men, and not the respect for him, but to get them to respect themselves and to remember what life is and what living is, and to laugh again and care again. And he brings these men away from the brink. At the end of this part, he has managed to save a bunch of his own bridge crew, but endangered a bunch of other people. So Bright Eyes Lamaril, he's executed, and Kaladin gets hung up to be left in the High Storm to the Stormfather's ultimate judgment. Essentially left for dead, chained up in the middle of a tornado, a hurricane, whatever it is. The storm wall. And it turns out that he actually manages to survive it in the end. And there were hints through a lot of this first part. I think the first time I noticed it, he had a sphere that he was trying to... So sphere being a form of currency that gets infused with Stormlight, and that's how you can tell it's legit. If they've no Stormlight in them, they call them duns. They can still be worth the exact same thing, but people are more skeptical about them because they might be fake and not actually be able to carry Stormlight. So I guess the important resource in this world is actually Stormlight, thinking about it, not the gems themselves. The gems are just containers for it that you need in order to hold it, but the valuable resource is actually the Stormlight. If you could gather the Storm and channel it, that would make you really powerful, right? I'm guessing that's essentially how Stormlight users work. I don't know if there's an actual term for it. I haven't been given it yet, if there is, but Stormlight users, like Kaladin, seem to have some sort of powers. And it might be linked to the summoning of, or the owning of a shard. And I think that Kaladin has killed the shard bearer that was at the end of the prologue. Because he says at another point that he killed a Light Eyes, and that was the last person that we saw him fighting against. And he also said that he turned down a gift from Bright Lord Samaram, the guy who was commanding his army. So that may have been the Shard Blade. However, if he got the killing blow, I'm pretty sure it's not a thing like, oh, you take the blade. I'm pretty sure it's something that transfers from them to you, like magically. The possession of the shard. So maybe, like, he still has it. I'm wondering if Kaladin has the ability to just summon a Stormblade, but doesn't know it, and will eventually figure it out. And so that's more where my prediction was going for a lot of this first half. And how that linked with the use of Stormlight-infused powers themselves, like the lashings that Stheth seems to use. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm pretty sure that the Stormlight is related to the ability to summon a Shard Blade or to wear Shard Plate. I don't know. But yeah, it did sort of get revealed at the end that he is basically able to use the power of Stormlight because he survives the High Storm and lets go of a dun sphere afterwards, which should have been filled with Stormlight. It was out in the storm all night. So he's obviously used that power somehow to survive, which is sort of what I was waiting for to happen, because there was a number of instances before that where he had spheres that should have been infused with Stormlight but then weren't, and he was like, oh, he said that Gaz must have given him bad ones or something, but they weren't. He just soaked the power up without realizing it. And it seems to give him extra endurance or strength during these moments of, like, desperation that he experiences when running the bridges. So there were a bunch of hints about that going through, and I'm glad I picked up on them, because it did turn out to be a thing. But that's pretty much where Kaladin's wrapped up at this point. I will mention my favourite character in his story arc, aside from Rock, who is awesome. Teft's pretty cool too, but Rock's awesome. I love his backstory, how of the people who get into duels by getting drunk and singing, and whoever can sing after the most beers is the winner, because at that point everyone's too drunk to remember the argument. Perfect world building, Brandon. Good job. But yeah, other than Rock, in Kaladin's storyline, there's a sort of character called Syl. I can't remember what her full name is because she just goes by Syl. But I'm of course talking about the adorable little Windspren. I love her. She's amazing. She's so sassy. And at first she doesn't really understand very much, and even at the end of this part she doesn't have a great understanding, but she's seeming to get more sentience and intelligence, and not just intelligence but cognitive thinking skills, the ability to add thoughts together and process information rather than just understand it in the moment of whatever conversation is happening. And that in itself is weird, because the Spren are these little figments of light, essentially, of different colours that get attracted to different things. Wind, or emotions, or glory, or rot, or whatever. There's loads of different types of Spren, and they're all over Roshar, and they're a fascinating part of the story, and I imagine they're going to be a huge part of the story. I'm wondering if the Spren, this is a wild theory, but I think the Spren could be related to the Voidbringers in some way, and Syl regaining her sentience somehow is her becoming a Voidbringer, but I don't want to be right about that, because I love Syl. She's great. Please hope we get more of her. Obviously, don't confirm or deny anything. This entire video is going to be predictions ongoing forward for the Stormlight series, and not just that, but for the Cosmere in general. So, if I say anything that's right or wrong, please don't tell me if it's right or wrong. Feel free to laugh at me about it, but don't tell me what is correct or not. I'll figure that out for myself. But yeah, Syl's great. She's a little wind spren. At first she's just a mischievous bother, but she starts getting more sentience. And she starts really helping Kaladin. She helps them find more knobweed when they're trying to heal the wounded members of Kaladin's bridge. She's helping them find the herbs. And then she helps in a bunch of little ways, basically, doing as much as she can. And she seems to travel through using gravity in weird ways, which is very similar to lashing, so I think the Spren are possibly also just a creature of Stormlight themselves. And perhaps the reason why Kaladin can see and interact with Syl much more easily is because of his connection to the Stormlight, or the shards, or whatever his connection actually is when it gets explained. Maybe that's why he can see Syl, if she's like a fragment of Stormlight. That could also make sense. Perhaps every shard bearer has, like... No, because I haven't seen any Spren in other people. Other shard bearers that are like talking and sentient. She's the only one, so yeah, don't know what's up with Syl, but can't wait to find out more about her. Really love her as a character. Moving on from Kaladin a bit, the second main character that we get in this book is Shallan. I don't know if that's how you meant to say it, but Shallan. She is in Cabranthium, I believe, and she is looking for Yasna Kholin, the princess, daughter of dead King Gavilar, and she's trying to find Yasna so that she can become her ward, which is like an apprentice essentially in the scholastic arts. In this world, men are about killing and destroying, and women are about academia and logic and art, and things are very narrowly, like, very separately divided, like, to the point where there's feminine foods. Like, apparently jams are feminine food, so men aren't meant to eat it. Okay? It's fine with me. I'm not that big on jam. But, yeah. Weird little details which make this world very segregated, and it's already a very segregated world, because the entire caste system seems to be based on the colour of one's eyes, whether they're light or dark. I'd be fine, because I have beautiful blue eyes. Anyway, Shallan is a light eyes, and she's trying to become Yasna's ward so that she can study and grow and become a better high lady, or whatever they call themselves. Brightness, that's what they call themselves, because they have light eyes, of course. But she's not actually there to study and be Yasna's ward. She's there just to worm her way into her life enough so that she can steal Yasna's soulcaster and replace it with her father's broken one. Father who I think she might have murdered, but I don't know that yet. She just keeps thinking about a bad memory of him and what she did as well, as I don't know if they're two separate and distinct things, and it could be something nasty that he did to her, and that could be the case as well as her murdering him, or one of those could be the case, or neither. Don't know fully yet. But her family's fucked up, basically. Her father's dead now, and people are calling after the debts that he owed, because he was a corrupt lord and ruler. Promised people things that they didn't have, and then fabricated quartz with an illegal soulcaster, which they could then sell and grow the house. But now the house is fucked because he's dead and the soulcaster's broken, so Shallan goes to steal it from Jasnah. And there's not too much development in this portion of the novel. She's actually out of the middle section, but in the first and third parts so far she's been present. So at first we sort of learning a lot about the world from her perspective because it's her first time seeing it, so it gives us a fresh lens of someone who doesn't know the world. And I think that's what she was used for mainly in the first part, as well as introducing some important characters like Princess Jasnah, who is obviously going to be like a huge part of this story. She's a heretic, not religious, which is fine by me because she's correct. Sorry, I just lost like half my viewers. But at first, not too much is going on with Shallan. She does manage to get herself apprenticed to Jasnah, and they start studying in the Palladium. And some dude called Brother Kabzal is trying to get in her panties, but she's like, stop it, because he's an Ardent, which means that, I don't know, he's neither male or female? Maybe they're eunuchs. I hadn't thought of that, actually. Not that that would mean neither male nor female, but based on Branderson's other works, actually, like, Caesar didn't see himself as a man. So it could just be how the character perceives themselves, and maybe everyone in the world perceives them that way. So maybe the Ardents are eunuchs. I hadn't actually thought about it. But that could sort of fit with working Cosmere logic, as much as I don't like it. But yeah, he's chatting her up and trying to get into her good graces and trying to make sure that Jasnah doesn't turn Shallan away from religion. But I don't think that's going to be a problem, because Shallan at the end of the section does go through with the theft and steal the soulcaster, after she witnesses Jasnah use it to kill 4 thugs who were going to beat, rape, and steal from them. At first I didn't like Jasnah, but now I'm like, yeah, no, I get it. I get why you do what you do and how you challenge people's thought process and stuff to try and get them to grow. She's a cool character. I know we get more of her going forward. I don't think for a second she's gonna just like think her soulcaster broke. She obviously knows how they work, so she would know that, like, oh, this was broken. I'm sure anyone who knows how they work would be able to look at them and go, oh, this is broken because of this, and tell you how to fix it, or where you'd need to go to get a new one, or whatever. But it seems like these devices are very heavily controlled by whatever magistrate or powers. I don't know, somebody owns the soulcasters, the Fabrials they're called, although there's lots of different types of Fabrials, and they only get given out to the people who pay for them, basically, the High Bright Lords. So they're heavily controlled, but Jasnah has one somehow. We don't actually know how Shallan's father had one, but now Shallan has Jasnah's. And I'm guessing she's going to try and dip ASAP and go back to her family, but surely that's not going to work, because that'll look sketchy as hell. So maybe she'll have to stick around for a bit and just, like, hide in plain sight and then dip? I don't know. If Jasnah does decide to go to the Shattered Plains where her family are, then it would give Shallan a good excuse to dip and go back to her family. Especially if Jasnah decides to go to the Shattered Plains because she no longer has a soulcaster and she feels in danger. That could make sense. But I'll have to see how that plays out in the second part. Moving on from them, the other main character is the sort of two, Dalinar and Adolin, his son. And there's another son as well, slash brother, Rimarin or Renarin, I can't remember which one it is. And these are 3 Light Eyes who are fighting on the Shattered Plains. Or 2 Light Eyes who are fighting on the Shattered Plains, and one who can't fight or do much of anything, but will probably turn out to be important in some way. He might turn out to be a wit. Anyway, Dalinar is the old dead king's brother, and uncle to the current king, Elhokar, who binds people mainly through the fact that he doesn't bind people. He has no control over his subjects, essentially. They just pretend that he does because it's better than having someone who would actually take control of them. At least that's the read I get on it. But Elhokar is fighting for the vengeance of his father's death on the Shattered Plains. The Parshendi sent an assassin, who we know is Seth, but the man in white or something he gets known as, the assassin in white. Seth's son's Valono, something like that. He killed King Gavilar, Elhokar's father, and that sort of is the catalyst for all the events in this book, because it leads to the war on the Shattered Plains between the Alethi people, the Light Eyes, and the Parshendi, who are cousins to the Parshmen, Parshmen being slaves in this world. I don't know why every world has to have slaves in it. It sucks. People, stop writing slaves into fantasy. They're bad enough in real life. We don't need to perpetuate the idea of slavery to future generations that might not know of its existence otherwise. Stop writing slavery into your books. Anyway, the Parshendi themselves are not slaves. They're just a cousin to what people know as slaves, the Parshmen. And they're basically these people with like black and red marbled skin, or white and red marbled skin, and orange blood, and they grow armor like as a carapace, which is pretty cool. So they're kind of like, maybe they're also cousins of the Chasm Fiends. But essentially this war's been going on for 6 years, and neither side's making any progress, and that's because neither of them are actually trying to assault each other. They're just battling over the Chasm Fiends, and as I mentioned earlier, there's these huge chasms, and patrolling through the, not patrolling, but worming through the chasms are these huge creatures called Chasm Fiends, and they're very destructive and they can kill lots of people, but there's a point in their, I don't know, life cycle or week cycle or whatever it is where they have to pupate, so they go into like a chrysalis or something. So when that happens, they're extremely vulnerable. They're just like trapped and can't fight back or anything. You can go and kill them easily and steal the gem heart, which is full of crystals, or a giant crystal at the center of the Chasm Fiend. And these gem hearts are either what powers Fabrials, or it might be what powers Shard Blades and Shard Plates. I don't know how they're created, if they are created, or if there is a limited number. I haven't had that all fully explained in the text yet, but these gem hearts are some giant gem that will allow Stormlight infused powers of some form. So they're incredibly valuable, and the Alethi and the Parshendi are just fighting to get to the pupating Chasm Fiends first, because whoever gets there first gets to take the gem heart and leave. So it's turned into more of a contest than a war, because it's just a race to get there, and none of the Alethi princes, because there's like 10 different princes, and they're all jerks other than Dalinar, who is old and senile, but none of the different princes really give a fuck about the greater cause. They just want the fame and glory of capturing the most gem hearts and having the most gems from it. So the only person that's really trying to fight against this whole system is Dalinar, the old king's brother, and he's having visions, and there's all sorts of weird shit going on there that hasn't been fully explained yet, but he's having visions of Voidbringers and things in the past, but everyone thinks he's going crazy, and he is suggesting courses of action that are against his people's beliefs, so no wonder they think he's going crazy. Whether or not he is, I can't tell, but he seems to be having these shakes whenever a high storm comes, and then collapses and starts having weird visions of what he at least perceives to be the past, when the Night's Radiant would fall out of the sky like shooting stars and then beat up a load of Voidbringers and peace out. So yeah, Dalinar's got that whole thing going on. The entire time he's fighting against the fact that he thinks he might be crazy but doesn't know. And he's wondering whether to give the prince title down to his son Adolin, who he's been grooming for command. And yeah, and that's sort of where Adolin's character development goes as well. He's been groomed for command by Dalinar. So we have these two on the Shattered Plains as our main insight into the Alethi Parshendi war. And also as our main insight into Shardblades and Shardplates, but I've already talked about them a whole bunch. But both Dalinar and Adolin have their own Shardplate and Shardblade each. Dalinar's is called Oathbringer, which I know is the title of the 3rd book. So it'll be relevant later, that sword at least. Whether or not it's still in his hands, I don't know. As far as predictions for Dalinar, I think he's going to die at some point, or something like that. I don't think he's going to have a pleasant end, but at the end of this part, he's pretty much decided that he's going to give up his title to Adolin, his son. So I think that's pretty much guaranteed to happen now, and the fighting is just continuing on the Shard Plains. So I think that might be everything I've got to talk about for now. I've been really enjoying The Way of Kings so far, and the next time you see me will only be in a few seconds for you, but I'll probably be in different clothes. I hope that I don't go like the next week without changing. But who knows, because these books are really gripping. Hello again everyone. It is about 3 days since my last recording. 3, maybe 4 days. And I have now finished The Way of Kings, both Part 1 and Part 2. Where's the camera? There it is. Good job, James. Hefty boys. One hefty boy together. It's about 1,200 pages maybe. What a book. I'm going to try and pick up each of the storylines. So I'm going to go through each group of characters, each storyline, and try and pick up where they left off. Before I get into the discussion review proper, I just want to say I've really enjoyed this book so far. I'm glad that I decided to get into the Stormlight Archive and the Cosmere. And I'm looking forward to getting onto Words of Radiance, to be honest. I have nervousness for a lot of the characters, but yeah, it's been really great. There were some certain things about the ending that I didn't quite understand, not because I couldn't wrap my head around it, it just didn't make sense to me. But we'll talk about those in detail a little later on. Overall, solid book. Probably give it like an 8 out of 10. That seems fair. An 8 out of 10, I think. 4 stars to The Way of Kings. Anyway, without further ado, we'll get on to the main book discussion. And we'll start off with our sad boy, Kaladin Stormblessed. I don't know if he actually has a surname. Yeah, people do have surnames in this world. I was just trying to think about it, but then, yeah, the Colins are all Colin, so... I don't know if Kaladin has a surname. Maybe he does. Maybe it's actually Stormblessed, but that seems like a bit on the nose. Anyway, Kaladin, he had just been tied up in a high storm and survived. And we actually don't get his point of view right at the minute, because Teft is watching over him and we get Teft's point of view. And we find out that Teft is part of an ancient order of people sent to watch for the return of the Radiants. And he never believed in it. His parents did. And he's basically understanding what's going on with Kaladin, that he's able to drink the Stormlight or inhale the Stormlight and use its powers. So he keeps making sure that they bring infused spheres full of Stormlight to Kaladin, who's currently catatonic following the high storm that he survived, just still recovering. And the spheres let Kaladin heal quicker and get up and about again. Once Kaladin does eventually manage to recover, with the help of Teft and everyone in Bridge 4 basically watching out for him and keeping an eye on him, making sure he's recovering and doing their jobs as he's taught them and carrying on training and getting stronger and helping the wounded and stuff like that. And after Kaladin wakes up, we get this cute kind of scene in the Bridge 4 barracks or outside, where they're all around the campfire doing the usual thing with Rock cooking up a stew, and the rest of the guys give Rock a gift of a razor, and then he like gets all teary-eyed and then goes and has a shave and gets everyone else to shave. Yeah, that's pretty cute. It just shows the camaraderie and the bonding that's really happening with these men, and that's due to Kaladin making an effort. He's really brought these men together, which is cool. And it's not long after that when the new people come to replace Gaz. Well, to probably murder and replace Gaz. We don't really know what happened to him, but there's the Hashal and Metal, I believe, Light Eyes, who come to take over, and they saddle the Bridge 4 with Parshendi, a guy they call Shen. And we don't get a lot from him, to be honest, but I think the way that he responds to other dead Parshendi indicates to Kaladin what he eventually uses to make a plan with, so I think that's really the main purpose of Shen here, but maybe he'll come back, I don't know. Regardless, the men all also get saddled with daily chasm duty, where they go down into the chasms and rifle through the dead bodies of spearmen and bridgemen and whoever they find to salvage as much as they can. So it's not a good job. It's one that involves risk of chasm fiends, risk of high storms just flooding you out, and you have to rifle through dead bodies all day and bring back a certain quota. So it's generally not fun. And the guys are pretty beat up about it, and they're struggling to carry the bridge because they keep losing members slowly, and like everything's going wrong. So they make a plan, or Kaladin makes a plan to actually train them. He says, we're going to be down here every day. They're not sending other people down here. We only have to bring back so much. They're not overworking us, so if we only have to bring back so much, we can spend the time to train you. And he starts training them all as a unit of spearmen, which takes some time, and it's slow going as they all come to terms with it and begin actually training. But it turns out that Teft was some sort of sergeant as well, or military leader, at least captain, because he takes straight to it and sort of gives it away to Kaladin by obeying orders so quickly. So yeah, they start training a little army in the middle of the chasms when they're on chasm duty. And we get a bunch more characters here as well. I'm not going to go into detail on them all, but people I imagine who will stick around. Moash, he seems like just a straight up killer. Sigzil, definitely want to know a bit more about him. The Herdazian fellow, hey Gancho, I've forgotten his name, Lopen, I think, Lopen. He's cool. I like that guy. The one with many cousins. He kind of reminds me of like a Rizzo rat from Muppet Show. How he's always got, I know a cousin, I got a guy, like one of my brothers, one of my sisters. So yeah, I like the Herdazian guy, he's cool. Yeah, this whole group, they start training into a little militia unit with the intent of one day escaping somehow, either fighting the way out or running somewhere across the Shattered Plains. They don't have a plan as of yet, but they are training. And through this process, it takes some time, but eventually Kaladin does realise, or not realise, but Syl helps him realise, the Spren, that he has the ability to use Stormlight, and Tef does as well. But it takes some doing before they actually get there. There's a lot of heavy-handed storytelling in this part, and I think that's probably one of my main issues with the book that makes it not perfect for me, is that a lot of the twists and stuff, some of them were way too obvious. They were way too heavy-handed and just shoving it in your face all the time, like that Kaladin can use Stormlight. way too obvious, and it went on too long once it was clear to the reader with the teasing of, hey, but you can use Stormlight, and I'm like, I know, I figured that out half the book ago. Can we get to him realizing that now? And I think that is probably the biggest complaint I have with the book overall, is things like that. All that time that was used on hinting about Kaladin's Stormlight when I'd already figured it out way ago could have been used to set more seeds for some of the other twists that just didn't quite have enough context in this book, at least, to make them make sense. Stuff like the Parshendi being the Voidbringers, that didn't really have much basis. Like at the end when they have that revelation, I'm kind of like, okay, if you say so, I don't know. Whereas there could have been some little extra things just threaded in there to make that, not to point you towards that realization, but to make it make more sense when it does get revealed. I think that's probably the one area I think Brandon could stand to improve in this book, at least in this series. So hopefully that does improve a bit going forward. Some things were over-explained and some things were under-explained, or over-hinted, under-hinted. But moving on, Kaladin and his crew, they're taking losses now. They get sent out on bridge duty every day and chasm duty every night, and it's shit, and they're losing men, and it's getting to the point where they don't have any hope. They've managed to steal some spheres from the chasm duty by firing them with a bow to the bottom of a bridge, which Lopen then collects as they run past on bridge duty the next day, because they're not allowed to take stuff out of the chasms. So there's that, and they're using the money to like care for the wounded from all the bridge crews, not just their own. So they are slowly gonna replenish their numbers once those wounded recover. But Kaladin decides to come up with another plan, and he realizes how Shen reacts to the dead Parshendi, and decides to mutilate a corpse and then wear it as armor to attract the fire of all the Parshendi archers on the opposite side when they're doing a chasm run. And then that'll keep his team safe. And so he tries it, and he just charges out wildly, wearing these red bones of the dead Parshendi that they'd scavenged. And they all go crazy and start pointing directly at him. Shen goes catatonic and just stops and gets real sad. And the enemy Parshendi are all firing down at Kaladin. He's using his Stormlight that he's now a bit more aware of to dodge out of the way of all the attacks and move the arrows so that they don't hit him. And he essentially manages to aggro the entire volley coming from the Parshendi while the bridge crews get into place. So he doesn't get punished for it because it turns out to work, and unlike the side run that went so wrong and caused a failing of the battle, this actually causes a victory. So Matal gets promoted from that, I believe, or Hashal, whatever. And Kaladin gets to then become a more important member of the team. He then has use, because he's the one who came up with it and can actually manage to do it because of the Stormlight. So the plan then is just to enrage the Parshendi so much while charging at them that they miss all of your friends. And it works for a little bit. Apologies for the change of scenery again, but I had to take a little break and come back to this, so still the same day, but just a little bit later on. So I believe I'd wrapped up most of Kaladin's story, apart from the end bits, and I was about to move on to talking about Dalinar and Adlin more. And in the first half of the book, Dalinar, he just decided he was going to abdicate for sure no matter what. But in this half, we started getting a lot more attention and detail to what is actually going on in his visions. which I appreciated because it meant I didn't have to sit and read about him shaking in his chair, which I honestly hated. But we actually got to see what he was experiencing and how cryptic these answers were. And in the end, we find out that the reason those answers are so cryptic is because they weren't actually answers. They were like a pre-recorded message, essentially. This whole thing that's playing is playing not on a loop, but like it's like he pressed play on an old video cassette and then asked it questions as it was running and expected the things that were said back to be the response. So unfortunately, Dalinar takes the visions at their word and trusts Sadeas, who we know from Kaladin's point of view is not a good guy in general, just because of the stuff that he does to the people underneath him. Like, he's a bad guy. But Dalinar still has some faith in Sadeas. He thinks the visions told him to trust him. Dalinar has faith in Sadeas and thinks he should trust him and that he won't get betrayed. And it ultimately turns out to not be the best idea, because Sadeas sets him up for a huge betrayal. There's this whole mystery going on over who cut a leather strap on the king's harness and caused him to fall from his horse. Like an attempted assassination attempt. At least King Elhokar thinks it is. And later on we discover that this was actually done by Elhokar himself to try and get people to pay attention to him saying that there's assassins, which was the most stupid fucking thing. Yeah, minus points for Elhokar. I was in Dalinar's seat of being like, he's not a bad king, he's just inexperienced. But now I'm just like, what a dumb idiot. What a fool. Who would it... He gave people the idea to assassinate him and to undermine the people in his control center that were keeping him alive. And then made a big deal out of it, and like, this whole thing is his fault. So, I'm in the camp of fuck Elhokar at the minute, unless he like has some major redemption for the way he's behaved in this book. But Dalinar ends up trying to convince the other High Princes to go on a joint assault with him to the Shattered Plains. He says if we both go, we can pin them down, we can like get a strong, solid victory, and like use different tactics if we're working together and stuff. And he ends up managing to convince Sadeas after Sadeas clears Dalinar's name, so to speak. And that was a perfect way for Sadeas to get a foothold in on Dalinar's trust by taking up the investigation about the leather strap and saying Dalinar's innocent. He managed to gain his trust enough that then when they start doing joint plateau runs and it's going well, there's a really big one coming up at the tower, and they go to do it together. They take the biggest armies yet and march on 10,000 Parshendir on a chasm-themed pit in at the tower, the biggest plateau on the Shattered Plains. And Sadeas pulls out after Dalinar gets in and leaves with all the bridgemen, including Kaladin's crew, and strands all of Dalinar's army left for dead here. And again, I'll wrap this up later when it comes to the big crescendo. I'm sort of doing bits and pieces here, but I want to take some time to just talk about the other characters that are in this plotline, because Adolin gets a little bit of development here, and we see him have some duels and struggle with the question of whether or not his father's insane. And we actually get to see him develop and realise, no, my dad's right sometimes, but he's not always right, and that's the most important thing, that they both have things to learn still, moving forward. So Adolin didn't get a lot of development, but I imagine he's going to get a lot in the next book. I've also been told that there's a big duel coming up, so I'm guessing that has something to do with him, given his propensity for dueling. He's an interesting character. He's like a ladies' man, and you know, I can get behind the flirtatious natures of a young man in his prime. I can understand that. I'm no longer in mine, but I know those days. Yeah. I don't mind daddling. But one of the even more interesting characters in this storyline for me was Navani. I found her fascinating, and I have to say, in the same way that now when I read Cadsuane in the Wheel of Time, I see Shora Agdashlu, and now I see that with Navani as well. I think Shora Agdashlu, she would be like, that's how I pictured Navani while I was reading her. And I don't know if that's why I really liked the character, but maybe it was. She was really cool. And so she is Gavilar's widow, the Queen Regent essentially, and Elhakar's mother. And she has an old flame for Dalinar, and Dalinar has a flame for her, but he never pursued it because of his brother. That old story. And it takes some time for Navani to crack his shell, but once she does, they have some really sweet moments together, and it gives Dalinar some perspective in the end to know what's important and what he values at the end of the day. And yeah, I really liked their romance and their storyline together, and just the introduction to Navani as a character. She's like a fabrial engineer or architect, or I don't know the right word for it, artificer maybe. And she has some like cool pin thing that can remove hand cramps, and she's of course Yasna and Elhakar's mother. At one point they get in touch with Yasna via Spanreed, and she's there. And like listening in on the conversation almost. It's quite, yeah, Navani is a great character. I hope we get to see more of her going forward, and I'm sure we will. We did get a very small perspective of her at the end of the book, so here's hoping for more, fingers crossed. Hopefully Dalinar won't die, but if he does, we could get a lot of Navani POVs. We'll see. I don't want Dalinar to die now. At first, I didn't really care too much about the Alethi, but like now I don't want him to die. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. That's Navani, and all these things are coming together now on the Plateau Assault as Dalinar gets left for dead by Sedatus, and Bridge 4 decide to make a break for it. It's their best opportunity. They can say they got left behind and just go out, and people will think they got by a Chasm Fiend or by the Parshendi or something. They're all armoured as well, because they've been doing the weird thing with the Parshendi armour, so they're all fully like armoured and got tools, and there's spearmen bodies nearby with weapons on them and shit. So they figure, okay, we're gonna make a run for it. And then they see Dalinar's army still trying to fend off the Parshendi, and they decide to go back for them because man of honor, I guess. So the Bridge 4 charge onto the tower again and mount a rescue mission on Dalinar Kholin and Adolin and their army, the Bluecoats. I'm not sure if I mentioned in this in the first part, but the Parshendi grow armor. They have like this carapace skin that grows from them, and it's the same as like plate mail essentially. But lighter and more flexible, and obviously attached to them. So that's obviously got some link to the rock creatures that were in the prelude, because apparently the Parshendi of Voidbringers, at least, yeah, that bit's a bit blurry, so I'm not going to go too in depth on it. But the Parshendi have got some interesting culture going on that we don't know enough about yet, and need to know more about, and how that affects the Parshmen in the rest of the world as well, if they're all suddenly going to get taken control of by Odium, this maleficent force. I feel like taking over the Parshmen, like some godly force just taking over them and turning them into rampaging beasts, is too similar to Mistborn for me. So there's got to be something else going on there, because I don't think Brandon would do that twice, and that's basically what happens with the Kolos armies and the Inquisitor armies, and eventually sort of even the Kandra armies in Mistborn. So like, I don't think he's going to do that again, and I want to see where the differences come in with how Odium plays with the world versus how Ruin played with the world. But there's a Parshendi Blade Shard bearer anyway, and Dalinar's getting into a sticky situation with him because he's already spent hours and hours fighting for his life amongst a horde of Parshendi warriors. So his armor's like already broken in loads of places, he's leaking Stormlight, and he's generally winded and wounded. The fight with the Shardbearer is not going well at all. And in the end, Kaladin turns up to rescue him after the rest of Bridge 4 had got their bridge down across to the plateau and started holding the position against the Parshendi themselves, using the training that Kaladin had given them. He did an initial whirlwind himself as well, became the storm, and said the last words of the Night's Radiant or whatever. There's a lot of deep lore here, and it's not 100% clear in my head yet. I don't know if that's because I didn't catch everything, or because it hasn't been said yet, but I'm sure I'll get a more clear idea of things as I learn more in future books. But Kaladin charged in and did his whole Stormlight magic boop-ba-doop-boo thing, and like just used his skills as a spearman enhanced with the Stormlight to take down a bunch of Parshendi. Not just that, he did use like some, I believe it's called Surge Binding abilities yet. The only reason I know it's called Surge Binding though, rather than like Lashing, is because it said in the Ars Arcanum in the back, so I stopped reading that because it was giving me information that hadn't been like actually clarified in the text. So I haven't read the Ars Arcanum in the back of the book, I just saw a couple of things in it. But he does all his Stormlight magic, and they manage to hold a position at the edge of the plateau next to the bridge leading away. And a lot of the Parshendi are just like stunned by Kaladin. They start saying this weird phrase over and over again when they see him do crazy shit. So I don't know if he's some sort of figure in their mythology. I guess if you're a Voidbringer, then the Radiants are your version of the Voidbringers, right? They're the bad guys coming to kill you. So I guess they see him and just like start shitting it. I don't know, I'm not entirely sure what's going on there. Obviously gonna go into more depth in the future as he gets more interactions with them. But after he's done the initial staging to, you know, try and rescue some of the army, he sends Adolin on the retreat, Kaladin does, and goes to find Dalinar, rescues him from the Shard Bearer, wounds him but doesn't kill him, and then convinces Dalinar to retreat without trying to take the Shard Bearer shards. Dumb motherfucker. Anyway, they mount off the retreat and manage it, and everyone gets away. They get back to the camp and confront Sadeas, and confronting Sadeas is not really... Nothing really happened. Dalinar basically walked up and said, I want to buy you slaves, here's my shard blade. And threw one of the most powerful weapons at the feet of a man who just tried to kill him a few hours before, rather than just stabbing him with it. He could have literally just walked up, offered his hand as if to shake, and then just summoned his shard blade in the middle of the guy's chest, and that would have been it, done. His eyes would have burned out. Done. Walk away with the bridgemen and your son, and probably no one would question you because they just saw their leader do the most cowardly thing possible and abandon you for no fucking reason against a fight that could have won the war. At least from the numbers and statistics that I've been given, I don't actually believe that that fight could have won the war. I think the Parshendi numbers are going to be way, way huger than we expect. And not just counting the Parshmen that are already in the world. I mean, wherever their base of operations are, I don't think they're committing nearly as much of their military as the Alethi believe them to be. So in the end, with Dalinar there, it's a bit anti-climactic. Sorry, not with Dalinar so much as with Sadeas. I would have liked to see his head cut off. Hopefully it'll still happen. Maybe that could be a big duel Adolin and Sadeas in a duel. That would be interesting, because he does have both shards now, so they are evenly matched. Yeah, I can see that happening. That's a prediction. Adolin and Sadeas are going to have a big duel. And maybe Adolin will have to duel some other people to work his way up the chain to Sadeas or something, considering he's a High Prince. And Dalinor's not going to like that, because he's the High Prince of War now, and he follows the codes which say no dueling. So, interesting. Don't know how that's going to play out. Regardless, that's most of their arc sort of wrapped up. Dalinar, Adolin, and Navani have all been trying to discover the true meaning. Oh, I'm sorry, and Renarin, the other son, have all been trying to discover the true meaning behind Dalinar's visions, and it turns out he's managed to translate some ancient language, and they come to those realizations at the end that I mentioned a bit earlier, concerning the message being strict start to finish, not a response. And the last thing sort of we hear on Dalinar that just makes me anxious for the guy is that Seth's son Volano is after him. And I'm going to have to take a minute here to talk about Seth. So, this guy is the assassin from the beginning, and he's been slowly seen moving between different masters throughout the novel. He ends up controlled by a shadowy figure that we don't know, who tells him to go and assassinate a bunch of rulers and kings, basically, and to cause as much chaos as he can and be seen doing it, and be seen in white doing it. And the final order that Seth gets at the end of the book is to go and kill Dalinar. I don't want him to die now, because I feel like he's just found himself, and I feel like it's the worst time. But this does mean that now... So Kaladin and his team became Dalinar's personal guard, right? Like his honor guard. He offered them a job, said, look, I don't want you to be slaves, don't worry, you can all be free men if you want, but if you want to stay here and be soldiers, I want you and your team of professionals, or whatever he called them. He hired Kaladin's men to protect him, so Kaladin vs Seth could happen soon, and Seth has a shard blade and knows how to use surge binding, so maybe Kaladin will see somebody else using it and decide, oh, I need to learn how to do shit like that. Whether or not Dalinar's gonna die, I hope not. If he does, then Adolin and Sadeas dueling would be a lot more likely. I worry for Navani if Dalinar does go and she loses a second partner or love. That's gonna suck for her, and I liked her. But moving to the other side of the ocean with Kharbranth, we have Shallan and Yasna to catch up with a bit. And Shallan had stolen the Soulcaster from Yasna, but Yasna doesn't seem to have noticed. And a few weeks go by, and Shallan's trying not to seem suspicious, so she doesn't want to just like steal it and leave, because then it'll look super... So she instead sticks around for a bit and carries on this sort of flirtation romance with Brother Kabzal, who I thought from the beginning had like creepy vibes, didn't really like him. He keeps bringing a bread with jam on it, which is meant to be like this cute thing, but it turns out in the end it was poison. However, before that happens, Shallan has been trying to use the Soulcaster and figure out how it works before she takes it home to her brothers. So she ends up soulcasting a goblet in her room into blood, and then in order to try and cover it up, she fakes a suicide attempt. It read like she didn't mean to fake a suicide attempt. She said she was trying to make it look like she'd fallen and got hit by a vase or something, but like, I read it as she faked a suicide attempt. She cut her arms with some pottery. It wasn't fun, but I understand it being there for the purpose of the narrative, and it is important to talk about stuff like that, even if it isn't always fun to read or write. She ends up in hospital under strict care from Yasna and the Ardents and King Taravangian, who's I'm not going to say any more on for the moment. I liked the guy. He almost made me cry. And then he broke my heart at the end of the book. We'll get back to that. Brother Kabzal eventually comes to visit her, and he tries to give her some bread and some strawberry jam. And it's a weird scene, and he gets Yasna to try some too. And then he starts running away because the jam's mouldy. And then he falls over and dies. And Shallan has been poisoned. And Yasna needs to soul cast her blood to purify it. I'm guessing she turns it into something else and then back. I don't know exactly how that works. But she needs the soul caster, and Shallan's like passing out, but knows that she has the real soul caster in her pouch and Yasna doesn't. So she gives it back to her and gets found out. Like, she gets healed, but Yasna says, look, you fucked up, you gotta go. And so, some time passes before Shallan realizes that there's some things that don't add up, and figures out that Yasna's soulcaster was a fake all along, and that Yasna can soulcast without it. And she thinks that because she stole a fake one, she can soulcast without a soulcaster as well. So I don't know if people can actually soulcast without a soulcaster. I don't know if there's any soulcasters that do anything, or if everyone that uses them can do it anyway, and they either don't realize or pretend to perpetuate the belief that it's a tool. The whole thing is confusing as hell. I know little to nothing about soulcasting, but hopefully we'll actually get to learn some more stuff about it in the next book. It turns out Kabzal was an assassin anyway, a part of the same group of people who provided Shallan's father's soulcaster. Oh, and here's where my prediction was slightly off. So Dalinar did win a shard blade, but he gave it up, so he doesn't have access to it. He can't actually summon it without using it, without having found a new one at least anyway. So I was wrong on that count, but Shallan did have a secret shard blade that she got from her father, and I did think she'd murdered her father, based on a couple of things she said. I think I said that in the first half, but I didn't realise that she'd got a shard blade off him too. That was a pretty cool surprise, and she used it to escape or to do something. I can't remember exactly where it was used, but she pulled out a shard blade in a random moment. It was like, oh shit. Okay. So that was cool. But yeah, in the end, she ends up approaching Yasna and saying, look, I know you're soul casting and you're using a fake that doesn't do anything. I want you to train me. I know I fucked up and stole your fake, but at the end of the day, it was a fake. How many other people do you know that can soul cast without? I've done it. Teach me your ways. And she ends up asking Yasna about these weird spirit things that she's been seeing in her sketches. Lately, when she's been sketching, there's been these like shadowy figures at the edge of the rooms with weird symbols on the face. It's like getting closer to her, and it's really quite creepy. It is creepy. It was a bit scary. Like, almost reminded me of the Weeping Angels and Doctor Who, if you've ever seen that episode. These shadowy figures, it turns out, are Spren, according to Yasna. They're like soul casting Spren, I guess. And Syl, it turns out as well, is a binding Spren. It's really confusing, these Spren. I know it's going to be like a key part of the magic system, so I'm trying not to butcher too much about it. I'm just excited to see what develops from that. But there's people all over the world trying to study the Spren and figure out what makes them work and stuff, and that's really cool to see those little pieces dotted over here and there. The Spren are obviously a huge part of this world and its inner metaphysics and its magic system. So yeah, excited to learn more about the Spren and about the magic systems, basically. For this book, like, the character development was on point, the plotting was pretty good, but the thing that lacked for me was actually explanations of the magic and a couple of the twists. The big twist for me was Taravangian, the king in Cabaranth. I love the guy, and it turns out he was the shadowy figure behind Seth, sending him to kill loads of kings, and ends up ordering him to go kill Dalinar at the end. So, like, that kind of broke my heart, and I didn't know what to think about it. And it turns out he also has a secret facility where he's been recording the last words of, like, patients who he thought were gonna die from his hospitals. He's doing it because he thinks it will save the world, but it's also really fucked up. So, like, that comes back to the whole thing with, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey as well, that Dalinar experiences. You know, this might be to save the world, but is the destination worth it? Is doing this, like, basically abducting these people, poor people, or people that nobody would miss from hospital beds, and then draining their blood to slowly kill them so that you can record their last words. Like, that's fucked up, dude. Is it that important to get these last words? And I get it, because the last word, they're not normal. These people, it's not specific to the person. They're sort of like weird proclamations, almost prophetic sounding, dying screams of the turmoil, talking about the desolation and death and storms and all sorts of nasty shit. And I guess that tells us where the epigraphs at many of the parts of this book were based on, because those words, those accounts of the dying were scattered through the book without explanation until the end. But the true purpose of them and what it actually means going forward is yet to be revealed. Nevertheless, my heart's a little broken on the Taravangian front, because I really liked the guy. He had some words about suicide to Shalom when she was in a hospital bed, and like, it got me really emotional. So then to have this twist, it was the most unexpected thing. And I get his motive behind the dying words thing, even though it's really fucked up. I don't get his motive behind sending Seth to go and assassinate a load of kings and rulers. So, like, not that I'm saying they're good people, I don't know a lot about a lot of them, and even Dalinar from an outside perspective might not be a good person. I didn't care for him that much at first. I like him now because I've been inside his head, but for an outsider, that could just be another tyrant on the list, especially the reputation that he has. So yeah, I don't know what to think about Taravangian other than I'll see what happens with him. I think the last character that I should probably mention is Wit/Hoid. Now, Wit disappears. He stops being the king's wit, and he goes and talks to a few different people, and tells them, including Dalinar and Kaladin, and some guards at Kholinar, that's what it's called. And he might talk to some other people too, but he basically just flits around planting little seeds and thoughts of ideas in different people, and he tells them to call him Hoid. I don't know if he is actually Hoid, but I think he probably is, or at least somebody of Hoid's capacity. If he's not Hoid, he's somebody else who can world hop and do some crazy shit, and he's pretending to be Hoid to either cover for Hoid, and like leave a false trail, or to try and taunt him out of hiding, maybe. That could be another option. Or it is actually Hoid, but that feels like, I don't know, I feel like Wit's his own character, because when he thinks in his own head, he thinks of himself as Wit, not as Hoid, and that's kind of confusing. But yeah, I just thought I should at least mention Hoid as a weird anomaly that has popped up in this and in Mistborn. And I know he's a character in the fandom that fans go crazy for. He's the mysterious #1 guy to look out for in the Cosmere. And that's another point, actually, while I'm there. I did appreciate in this the references to the Cosmere. I feel like this is the series where I will learn more about how the Cosmere at large works and how those individual worlds fit into it. I just hope that it's not all perpetuated with the same ruined misinformation that you can't actually trust anything you learn, and therefore by the end of the book there's only actually one thing that you've learned because the rest of it was all garbage. But I expect it to follow a different pattern because, like I said, Odium and Ruin are different things and they work in different ways, presumably. So yeah, I think I've got to the end of like my list of characters and plot lines that I wanted to cover, and I've given a fair few predictions as well. And this video is probably already long enough. I really love this book. It was great. I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10, like 4 out of 5 stars. Not perfect, but only mainly because certain twists were overemphasized, and that led to other ones being way underemphasized, or not emphasized as much as just didn't have enough seeds in place to set them up as legitimate theories. And yeah, I'd say that led it, and the lack of the magic system as well. The magic's really cool and great in this series, and I'm sure I'll learn to love it much more as it continues. But right now, it's very vague and blurry, and instead of like having a good understanding of a magic system, I have a next to nothing understanding of about 5 different magic systems. And I'm not sure if that's the right way to do it, but I'll see how it progresses moving forward. Anyway, that's going to be it for this video. Part 1 and 2 of The Way of Kings is now done, and I can finally move on to Words of Radiance now that I've recorded this video. Which I'm probably going to do right after this. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the book. Head down to the comments and let me know. Did you enjoy The Way of Kings? Is there anything you want to know about my thoughts or theories that I didn't cover here? I feel like I got most of it down, and this is going to be one of my longer videos. I imagine a lot of this series will, given just the pure length of these novels. But yeah, head down to the comments and let me know your thoughts on The Way of Kings and this video itself. And don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more Cosmere content and plenty of Wheel of Time too if you're into that. Till next time, I'm James from Wheel Up Time. Tai'Shar.